Yeah, I'll just give a quick introduction on Startup Grind as we're waiting to get started here. Um, Basically, Startup Grind's a global community for entrepreneurs. It started out in Silicon Valley. It'll be 11 years and 11 years this January, I believe. And basically started out as the founder wanting to get Derek Anderson wanting to get advice from different speakers he brought into the community, learning from what they did right, what they did wrong along the way, and apply that to his own ventures and help other startups in the community learn from those speakers as well. And now we've gone to over through a chapter model over 500 different chapters around the world, different cities and universities, bringing speakers and leaders in the entrepreneurial ecosystem every month to come in and talk to um, the local startup communities. And, it's always been in-person events in the past. Um, and yeah, through COVID, like stayed pretty strong and continued to host virtual events around the world, like more events than ever before. Um, and yeah, we're excited to come with you or come to all of you here tonight. And Brad Feld should be on shortly. So, excited to have him as our featured speaker. He's one of the co-founders of Techstars and also started the Foundry Group and the Startup Community Way. Is an author of the Startup Community Way and Venture Deals, and everyone that got a ticket for tonight is gonna get a copy of the Startup Community Way to read after the event. Um, so yeah, and it's good to see the chat going already. Some of you sharing your background, LinkedIn profiles. Um, no, I just sorry, 1 second. And yeah, you guys can keep chatting there. Perfect. Yeah, keep chatting there. And then just a quick introduction to some of our partners and sponsors. Um, so we're sponsored by a company, ShipQuid, out of Boston, that basically helps with the sales process, being able to pin down and edit your customer personas that you're going after, and continue to shape those buyer personas and profiles as you build out your the strategy for your business. So you can basically create one system for your whole sales team to get behind and really identify who they should be going after and speaking to um, at each stage of the process. Then we have another sponsor, Brex, which is the first corporate credit card for startups. And they have unique rewards programs and other offerings tailored to the startup community that most other credit card companies don't offer. And they also base their fee structure, base their requirements around more startup friendly programs and investment raised in other categories that banks typically wouldn't look at if you're an early stage company. Um, so yeah, we have special deals with both of those companies and a variety of partners, everything from the PR space to consulting and advisory, um, marketing services. So if there's any needs you guys have for your company, then feel free to reach out. We'll share some of them in a follow-up email as well. And chances are, we have a connection in the space that can help you and your company grow. LSX is one of the partners here as well. I see Leah on the chat here. Basically, and she just shared the link for their system that helps find speakers and speaking opportunities for different events. And yeah, and no, great to see all of you guys here. And yeah, Brad just said he's jumping in. Jumping in a second here. So perfect. And then yeah, and then again, we're virtual for the time being. So there's events coming from all the chapters around the world. So if you see an event in I mean, we have like events across the U.S. to Africa and China and Europe. Any location you see an event you're excited about, feel free to jump in and check those out as well. And then the way this chat is going to work is we're going to have yeah, so we're going to start off with more of a fireside chat format. We have some questions lined up, but also want to keep plenty of time open for Q&A from the audience and have everyone have a chance to ask our speaker any questions they have along the way. And if you have questions, we have a chat box as well where you can plug them in, and we'll ask them directly for you. And then, cool. So, all right, and yeah, so excited to have you guys here, and I know some of you, through some of our LinkedIn posts, like you've taken or had some, actually want to give a quick plug to this this group, the startup. Just gonna look it up real quick. Through Mighty Networks, which is a platform Startup Grind is using for our communities now, and Brad Feld actually has a community on there as well, which is how we got connected with him. So yeah, I'll share his community in the chat too, that you guys can all join in on. And
Right.
Looks like you're on now.
Voila.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
I paid my $20 and I'm part of the deal.
No, sorry about that. Yeah, glad we got you on here now, and thanks for joining and speaking with our Startup Grind community today.
My pleasure.
So I gave the introduction to our group, so not going to go through that again for everyone. Just happy to introduce you, and we're going to keep this pretty open, give everyone a chance to chat along the way, any questions that come up, and start with more of like fireside chat format, give you chance, like you have a pretty extensive background in both as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and sort of a startup community builder with Techstars, your new Mighty Networks community, and so I'd love to just sort of take a step back here and learn about the beginning, like what really got you. I know you've been involved in, or early on in your career, started several companies yourself. So, did you always have this entrepreneurial vision and passion, or what sort of got you into the space to begin with?
Well, I mean, my starting point, and for the people in Boston, I started as an entrepreneur in Boston. I went to school at MIT and started my first company there. I never really thought about doing anything else. I was fortunate that when I was in high school, my father, who was a doctor, had a couple of patients who are entrepreneurs in the computer business, and I was interested in computers, so my father connected me with them, and I got some early mentorship from a few folks, and that, as a teenager, that inspired me. And then my junior year of high school, I worked for a company in London. Again, a patient of my father's, got me connected, and that company was a company called Centronics. If anybody on this call is old enough, Evgeny might be. There used to be a thing called a parallel printer and a parallel port. And before a parallel port, it used to be called the Centronics port. They're the company that invented that. Centronics in Hudson, New Hampshire. Good memory, Dave. So I worked for them for a summer, and they had a product line. The printer was it was letter P and then numbers, and it was 351, 353. It's amazing to me that I can remember this shit. And on an Apple II computer, I wrote a character set developer for them. So previously, the way to define the character sets was they used a piece of graph paper. They drew in the little circles where they wanted, the letter E, and then they manually figured out the hexadecimal code for the matrix of the E, and then they had to program a chip for that. It was something called an EEPROM. And I wrote a piece of software on the Apple II that would allow you to, lay out on the grid, the letter E, and then you press a button and it generates the code that you need. And then in between my senior year of high school and college, and then for a couple of years, I worked for another startup, a husband and wife company that wrote software for the oil and gas industry. And I think this was really the thing for me that changed my frame of reference. They paid me $10 an hour. So I learned pretty quickly that if I worked 80 hours a week, I made twice as much as if I worked 40 hours a week. They didn't give me equity, but they gave me 5% royalty on all the software I wrote. So sort of a proxy for equity. So as I went to college, suddenly in the mail, in addition to getting paid for the hours that I worked, I'd get a check sometimes for $1,000 or $2,500 or whatever. And that was very powerful because it gave me a sense of, sort of creating something on my own with a company that was just starting, and getting paid for the work I was doing and for the upside I was creating rather than just getting paid a salary.
Okay. Yeah, and so is that sort of a model, like, it sounds like it worked out and really motivated you to keep going there. Is that like a model you've implemented in some of the other companies?
It just was like, again, the specific question was what inspired me, like how I think about it. And it was just a frame of reference. Like I realized pretty early that I didn't have to work for someone. I didn't really want to work for anybody. And when we started my first company, which was very uncreatively named Feld Technologies, I like to say I named it after my dad. It's a mistake to name a company after yourself because when things get all screwed up, they call for Mr. Feld.
Right.
I had a partner named Dave Jilk. They never called for Mr. Jilk. They always called for Mr. Feld when they were unhappy, even if my partner Dave had been the one that screwed things up. And we bootstrapped the business. We started it with $10, just as a way to split up the 10 shares of stock that we had. We didn't know anything about starting or running a company. We just sort of learned and figured it out. And, we had lots of ups and downs along the way. But when we sold the company, we still only had 10 shares of stock. We'd never raised any money. And fortunately, 7 years later, the stock was worth a lot more than $1 a share. So, it was just one of those things where, I think I was already culturally oriented to start companies rather than go get a job. And, again, I was fortunate. I was young. I had a backup plan. I could always go get a job if I needed a job. So from that perspective, I was pretty privileged. But at the same time, not knowing what I didn't know was a really helpful way to just get started.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you have a really interesting journey. Like, you've gotten, or you went through the entrepreneurial process and, still built everything else you've been involved in along the way, but sort of seems like you've taken shape into now, how can, or along the way, like, how can you take what you've learned and what other people have learned and apply it to helping other startups grow through Techstars and through the books you've written and other. I know you have a venture deals program helping entrepreneurs learn more about the investor side as well. So I guess what gave you the inspiration to go to the other side and like figure out how you can help entrepreneurs through this process, and what sort of led to that mission?
Well, my journey was one that sort of went through multiple phases. So I was a founder of a company. I sold it in 1993 to a public company. I worked for them for a couple of years, 94, 95, as chief technology officer. But during that period of time, I took almost all the money that I'd made, which was a couple of $1 million, and I invested it as an angel investor in about 40 companies. And I moved from Boston to Boulder in 1995. So I started off when I was living in Boston and in Boulder, but I invested all around the US, East Coast and West Coast. And it was the rise of the commercial internet. So it was a very good time to be an angel investor.
Right.
But during that period of time, I started a few more companies as well. So I was sort of straddling the line between being an investor and being an entrepreneur. I was co-chairman of a couple of companies, including a couple that went public. Had some, big successes and had some spectacular failures when the internet bubble collapsed. And at some point in about 2001 or 2002, after the internet bubble had collapsed and my world was a real shit show, I realized I couldn't kind of be an investor and an operator. It didn't work. It was too much. It was too hard. And I really wasn't enjoying sort of everything. And I reflected on what I really loved to do. And I didn't love the job of a CEO. I'd been a CEO, I was a good CEO,
right.
Co-chairman of a couple of companies, in two of the companies I was co-chairman of that were public. We replaced the CEO at some point. So for periods of time, I was chairman, I was acting as the CEO while being a VC investor. I didn't like the job. It just wasn't where I liked to play. What I liked to do was I liked to really support the CEO. And as an investor, my mental model is as long as I believe in and support the CEO, my job is to work for her. And if for some reason I lose confidence in the CEO, my job is to try to get back to a place where I support her as an investor. And if I don't, then I have a responsibility to make a change at the CEO level. So as I started to behave that way as an investor, I still sort of came at much of it from an entrepreneur's perspective. And for me, I love to learn. And what I realized at some point is that learning and teaching are basically the opposite sides of the same coin. You learn a lot by teaching, you teach through your learning. And I was very interested in, sort of at the beginning, and this is where books like Venture Deals came from, demystifying venture capital and demystifying venture investing well before it was popular or trendy to do. And the Venture Deals book, which came out in about 2010, was really started writing it in 2004, 2005 on Feld.com on my blog. I wrote about 30 blog posts about how a term sheet works. So, 2004, 2005, we're still dealing with the internet bubble. Venture capital isn't a thing. Again,
Right.
very few seed investors. But I just felt like the information asymmetry between an investor and an entrepreneur, which really benefited the investor at the expense of the entrepreneur, was stupid and was unnecessary. So I started doing that. The Startup Communities books came out of the experience I'd had with Techstars, which we started in 2006 in Boulder, where we had created in Boulder a very vibrant startup community. Well before the phrase startup community existed, nobody used that phrase. And in 2010, an article came out that said the way out of the global economic crisis. Remember, 2007, 8, and 9 was the global financial crisis, or the Great Recession, or whatever you call it. And the path out is through entrepreneurship and innovation. And the examples of where that's happening are in the Bay Area, New York, Boston, and Boulder. and this is 2010. Boulder's totally different than those other 30 cities. I mean, Boulder's 100,000 people. Like, we can get everybody in Boulder, like, not everybody in Boulder, but a big part of Boulder in the Hancock Tower, right? If we go to New York, we probably get the whole entirety of Boulder could live in one city block in Manhattan. So that's when I started thinking about what is going on here. And in 2012, came out with this book around, and created this phrase called startup communities as a way of helping people focus and understand that they could build startup communities anywhere in the world. And, Startup Grind is a great example of that. I mean, if you look at all the chapters that you have all around the world today, it's incredible. And, Techstars has had this kind of journey where they have, accelerator programs in 30 different locations around the world, and startup weeks and 100 and something locations around the world each year. And, I think the number of startup weekends that we have, I think we've had startup weekends in almost every country at this point. And so, this phenomena where you had to go to the Bay Area if you wanted to start a company, which I never liked, I never agreed with, I never believed it wasn't my lived experience. Today, it's very clear that that's nonsense.
No, I think that's interesting. Like, even the way you describe some of the communities, like you started talking about the Boulder startup community, and then there's a Techstars and a Startup Grind. Like, some are location based, some are organization based. I guess how do you think of what makes something a startup community, and what differentiates one from another?
Well, a big part of my thesis originally around startup communities was place, and focusing on place-based startup communities. How can you build a startup community in your city? That in 2012 was very powerful. And I think between 2012 and 2020 helped a lot of people all around the world not just understand what they should do to be effective at building a startup community, but recognizing that, hey, we could do it here. Let's go do it. Along the way, while there's plenty of virtual communities, and we're used to virtual communities, through Facebook and through maybe Twitter and LinkedIn some, and then there's plenty of sort of online virtual communities. And then you have organizations that have wide reach globally, whether it be Techstars or Startup Grind, that have a network that crosses geography. The real concept around startup communities specifically was very place-based. And even in the new book, in the Startup Community Way, a lot of the book focuses on place-based startup communities and what that means. And there's a key word there, which is topophilia. And topophilia means love of place. And the reason that so many people are motivated to put energy into their startup community, especially from a perspective that we talk about at Techstars, which is give first, right? Being willing to put energy into a system without knowing what you're going to get back from it. In that sort of context of place, if you love your place, you're willing to put energy into it. It's different versus an organization. The dynamics tend to feel a little different. COVID has occurred. The book actually, the Startup Community Way, came out in July, which we were done with the book in April. That's how long it takes to get from done to the book being released. Yeah. And we really had been finished with the book in February. So between February and April, we could make very small changes to it, but that's about it. And of course, between February and April, COVID hit and the whole world went virtual. If you had said in February or January of 2020 that the vast majority of people who work in offices are going to be working from their houses and everything's going to be just fine, don't worry about it, people would have said, who are you kidding? You're out of your mind. That's crazy. Not only can humans not do that, we won't be able to get any deals done. You won't be able to sell anything. People won't be able to actually function. And the infrastructure and technology won't work. Well, voila, here we are in September. And in fact, it works just fine. And there's strengths and weaknesses, but all of a sudden we're living in a virtual world. So personally, I've been spending a lot of time in the last 4 or 5 months playing around with exploring, trying to think about the concepts that apply to startup communities in a virtual construct. And I'll just end this thread with in the original book, Startup Communities, I just came out with a second edition of it as well. And in that second edition, we have a new chapter, which is called Rural Startup Communities. And in that, we focus on non-urban or non-city-based startup communities, which in Colorado, if anybody knows Colorado, we have about 70% of the population lives in about 20% of the land mass of the state. So most of the population is distributed across the non-urban part of the state. And there's been some really powerful startup community activities in these non-urban or rural places. And they tend to link multiple cities together. They tend to use a lot of virtual infrastructure. They're still place-based because it's, the Roaring Fork Valley, which is a part of Colorado that includes places like Aspen and Carbondale and Glenwood Springs and Basalt, but it's not as concentrated in terms of place. Some of you may know of. If you don't know of, I encourage you to give this a try. I've created a virtual startup community online just to play around with it. This is purely an experiment. It's got 4,000 or 5,000 people in it right now. I'm using a tool called Mighty Networks for it, which I think is very, very well tuned for something like this. And it's pretty interesting because you can have geographically based virtual activities, topical based virtual activities. People can, have lots of places to interact in different ways. And you're starting to see some interesting conversations develop. And, like most online things, of the people that are on, 1 or 2% are really active, and another 15 or 20% are active, and another 80% are kind of lurkers or not that active. But that's okay, because that's part of the experiment of understanding how it plays out.
Right. And I think, no, definitely check out the group there. That's actually how we connected, or Yeva joined the community first, invited me on, and yeah, and then, we started talking about different event groups. I had come out to one of your events at Babson about a year ago or so, and yeah, it was good, led to this. So great to have you.
It's a good example, right? Like,
yeah.
Sure, you could have sent me an email and I probably would have responded, but it might not have occurred to you in the context of trying to do something based on the other things that you're seeing. So one of the powerful things about startup community in physical space is the collision between people and the ideas that come from the collision between random people. That same collision happens in a virtual community. And it's not predictable. It's not deterministic. You can't say in advance, this is what I'm going to get out of it. And what you get out of it is kind of corresponds to what you put into it.
I think that's great advice. And then, yeah, so I know, and everyone that has a ticket is going to get a copy of oh yeah, that's a good point. I'll touch on that in a second too. Everyone that's going to that got a ticket is going to get a copy of your book, The Startup Community Way, that we're sending out. So, but yeah, I had a chance to look through some of the topics, and yeah, it was interesting. You mentioned most people focus on capital as just financial capital, but you were breaking down different categories of there's other things people should look at in terms of human capital and other areas is there. Other areas as well besides just the financial aspect. So yeah, if you want to touch on a little bit some of the other areas of capital people should be looking at in their startup communities.
Absolutely. Let me see if I can bring up. That's funny. I thought I had a slide for it. I just did a talk yesterday. Oh, here they are. I just did a talk yesterday in Alaska. It's kind of fun to say that, right? And a friend of mine in Alaska. Let me see if the share screen works. I've never used share screen on Bevy. I'm just sort of curious how it works. Nope, it's not going to work. I have to quit to be able to.
I can. Oh, let me make you.
It's okay. It's
You should be a host now if you want to.
I don't think that works. So I think on my computer I'm going to have to.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no. Hang on. It looks like it's going to work. Oh, that's cool. Let's just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's fun. So I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but there you go. The guy in Alaska that hosted did this graphic. It's from the book, and I think it actually is really very helpful to have it when I'm talking through it. When people talk about capital, they almost always mean money. And so you have this phenomena that happens in startup communities where people say there's not enough capital here. But if you look at the picture over here, we define 7 types of capital. And financial capital is one, but you've got intellectual capital, human capital, physical capital, institutional capital, network capital, and cultural capital. And that's important because every startup community everywhere has different types of capital. And I should have the screen share off now, right? I'm back. So you have different types of capital, and financial capital is one of them. But a lot of places have lots of other types of capital that they have a lot of strength around. And, a lot of times it's network capital or human capital, could be cultural capital. And the best way to generate more capital in the context of a startup community is to focus on the capital that you have a lot of and use it to attract the capital that you don't have very much of. And so it gets people out of this frame of reference of saying there's no capital here. Well, it's not true. There's a lot of capital. There might not be a lot of money here, or you might not know how to find the money in your startup community. But if you have these other things, if you focus energy on them and make sure people know about them, the money will come.
I think that's great advice, and focusing on what's strong about each strong about each community, and other values in addition to fundraising that can make one a good place for your company, or a different one a better area to focus on. So excited for everyone to get a chance to dig a little bit deeper on that through the book. And just want to touch on a couple of we have some good questions lined up from the audience. If you guys have any additional ones, feel free to go through the chat. First off, just a comment from Kelly that it's the first time, earlier in the conversation, every time you talked about the CEO you were helping or you were working with and investing in, you said her. It was just an appreciation of that reference there. That you've opened up for Q&A, like a lot of fireside chats, events, and just social media Q&A lately. So have you been overwhelmed with the response, and how do you stay organized and manage everything you have going on?
Well, it's been a lot, and I'm almost done. I knew that I would have a lot in August because of the launch of the book, and I've done 30 or 40 podcasts, and on a typical day I probably have 2 or 3 things like this that I'm doing right now. And they're all over the place, right? I mean, some of them are small groups like this. Some of them are very large groups. Some of them are keynote type things. Some of them are, I try to do Q&A, AMA type stuff versus talks, because I find that in the land where everybody's living in Zoom land all the time and video conferencing land, like having somebody talk at you for 45 minutes without any sort of movement around is a little exhausting. For me, I would categorize myself as being a little tired of listening to myself talk. I haven't quite hit my limit, but I'm getting close. We have a phenomenon in Denver the 3rd week of September called Denver Startup Week. It's the largest startup week in the world in physical sense. It's usually 10 to 15,000 people, I think, last year. They're doing it virtually this year. And so I committed to participate every day in at least one thing. So I think I've got like 5 things, over the course of that week. But then it's really back to my normal life in terms of, I generally do a couple of times a week a thing versus 3 a day. The interesting thing, I mean, the question about staying organized is the chronic question, I think, for most entrepreneurs. The demand characteristics on your time are greater than the time you have. I mean, I went upstairs last night to have dinner with Amy, my wife, Amy Batchelor, and we have dinner on the first night of every month. We call it Life Dinner. For those of you that are software people, we do basically the equivalent of an agile retrospective, and then we do the equivalent of forward sprint planning for the next month. So for people that aren't nerds, we look backwards for a month and just talk about how the month was, and then we look forward and sort of plan out the next month. It's not date night. I mean, it's a very deliberate recalibration each month of our time. And I mean, I was done last night, with work. I was going to go exercise. Amy really we hadn't had any food delivery at all, so we decided to have a special dinner last night. We had sushi delivered, which was the first time literally since March 11th that we've had restaurant food delivered to us. And there just wasn't enough time to go exercise or run. Okay, so we did that. We had a great couple of hours together. And at the end of it, maybe at 8 or so, 7:30, we were done. And, I was feeling anxious because I just had so much unfinished stuff from the day. And I said to her, which is something I usually don't do, because when I'm done, I'm usually done for the day and pick it up the next day. I said, you know what? I think I want to go downstairs and, just fuck around with my computer for an hour. And she's like, are you sure? Is that, we just had life. Do you really want to do that? I'm like, no, I just feel anxious. And it's a function of this, it's a function of just a little too much. And by the way, as I, woke up very early this morning, because I just woke up wide awake, nothing is going on that I had to be on top of last night. So it's sort of in those moments for me, I realize that I'm starting to hit my limit when I feel overwhelmed versus, it's a lot. It's always more than I can get to, but it's fine.
No, and I think that ties in really well. Some comments from Sid and Dave. You've been pretty open with, if you are overwhelmed or, just talking about the entrepreneurial burnout and other aspects that tie in, whether it's, now, with COVID obviously doesn't help with Zoom fatigue and, sort of no time to really turn off the clock and go home from work. So I guess, what have some of the approaches you've taken towards, separating the work-life balance and, still being able to go back to whatever you're working on excited every day?
So a couple things. One is I don't use the phrase work-life balance anymore. I don't think that that's the right phrase.
Okay.
I did use it for a while, but I've changed my approach. I now refer to it as work-life harmony. And I like the word harmony better than balance, because balance implies that the scales get in balance. And it's just not how it works. It's constantly moving all over the place. And if you think about improv jazz, which is where harmony comes into play in a very visual way. I mean, stand-up comedians, same kind of thing. And frankly, a lot of business is the same sort of thing. When you're in harmony, you know it. And when you're out of harmony, boy, it's abrasive and it grates on you. And it motivates you to try to get back into harmony. But harmony doesn't mean balance. So for me, I don't have any kids. It's just me and Amy. So we have a bunch of tactics personally that we use, and the Life Dinner is as a tactic. Another tactic is digital Sabbath. I don't do computer, phone, or meetings between Friday night and Sunday morning. I'm not religious, but I'm Jewish and I come from a Jewish tradition. I just one day said, you know what? I know lots of really successful people that do Sabbath on Saturday and disconnect. And for me, I'm going to do that once a week. By the way, you don't have to do it once a week. Do it every now and then. You don't have to go away for a week once a quarter, which is another thing we do, a Q vacation. I disconnect for a week every quarter, and just me and Amy. We don't have to travel. You can't do it for a week, do it for a day. Like it's the intentional, you know what? I'm not doing that computer work stuff today. I'm going to go live my life with, my partner, my significant other, my kids, myself, whatever I need to feed me. So incorporating that into your life. I just posted a blog post from Sunday. I wrote a blog post asking the question, "Are you at your best right now?" And I led off by, I'm not. I don't think anybody is. I mean, this is a really, really, really hard time for everyone on our planet, for our species. It's a particularly challenging time in lots of different parts of the world. I think it's a very challenging time in the U.S. for a collision of a number of reasons, right? The health crisis, which I think, in the U.S. has been handled uh, very poorly relative to what it could have been. And I was very involved in the Colorado response for the first couple of months, and it was just crazy how many self-inflicted things that we're still paying for and will still pay for, that as a country we're suffering under. And they're not all just in the moment. They're also lack of investment over the last decade in certain things that if we had them in our healthcare infrastructure today, and if we had them in our government infrastructure today, and if we had the right kind of non-polarized dynamics between federal government, state government, like just a bunch of things that could work a lot better.
Right.
That's generated an economic crisis. And if you happen to be a shareholder in Zoom, you're pretty happy right now. But if you're somebody who has run a local business for 20 years, you're pretty miserable right now. If you're a frontline restaurant worker or somebody who works in a grocery store or in an essential worker category, you might have a job, but it's a pretty uncomfortable work world right now. If you're a teacher, your life kind of sucks. If you're a parent with kids that are trying to go to school, like just so many things that are messed up. And then that generates a mental health crisis, right? Like it is hard on all of us. And of course, in the US, we have amplification of a racial equity crisis, which has been going on since the beginning of the US, but sort of all of these things are colliding. So one of the things I think that's really, really important, sort of against that backdrop, is to try your hardest to be kind to yourself and to be kind to everyone around you. We are all going to make lots of mistakes. We're all going to have moments where we're not at our best. Nothing's going to work smoothly. Lots of things that we feel like should do things a certain way are not going to be that. And what I found is that people that can engage in a way, recognizing that kind of we're all going to fuck up, like it's just part of what's going on right now. And that's okay. I like to say there's multiple things you can do, right? When you're somebody who's made a mistake, just apologize, just own it. Don't defend, don't deflect. And a real apology, not "I'm sorry, Jason, that you feel that way about what I said."
Right.
Just "I'm sorry." Right? Here'd be a good example. "Hey, Jason, I'm sorry I didn't have my act together at 4:00 to join. Like there was an email in my inbox that said click on this and register this, and apparently I just didn't. When from a week or two ago." And sort of for the first 15 minutes of this, I'm sure there was a mad scramble. I know you called my assistant, Danny. Like that was a bunch of wasted energy that I caused by just not being on top of it. So I apologize. That's different than saying, "Hey, Jason, I'm sorry you had a hard time getting me into the thing." Right? And just like,
and no, I mean, obviously some of it's on, and it's owning up on both sides. Like obviously, some of it's on our side, like could have communicated more and, gotten you onto the platform. But no, I get what you're saying. Like it's just matter of fact, like this is what happened. And, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like, I think, that's a, good thought of, or a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking like either you succeed or either you fail. And, there can be mistakes and you can still succeed as an entrepreneur and succeed in even like a short-term goal without, we're having a successful chat right now. Like, even if it didn't work out the first 10, 15 minutes, like, it's been great so far.
Well, I wanted to, because I think you landed on something really powerful, right? Two comments. One is, look, creating a business is just an endless series of experiments, many of which fail. And as an entrepreneur, you're going to have, you want to have lots of experiments that don't work because that's how you learn.
Right.
And so as an entrepreneur, you're already conditioned to try things and know they're not going to work and learn from it and iterate, keep trying. When something doesn't work, if you show up in a headspace and a behavioral dynamic that is aggressive against the other person. Hey, Jason, why the fuck did you have that set up right? Or the email to him, we're trying to debug this, which is, this is all screwed up. Blah. That just escalates stress on the other side versus trying to learn from it, solve the problem. Hey, don't know what's going on, trying to figure it out. Okay. And oh, by the way, the other pieces of that, which I then said in the post, is laughter, right? Like
Right.
a smile, like just, we're in these little boxes, right? Like the difference between smiling at each other when you're in the little boxes versus it really makes a difference about how we feel against the backdrop of this incredible amount of stress that we're all carrying around, not just as entrepreneurs, but as, citizens of this planet right now. And so, I just encourage everybody to do their best, acknowledge that they're not always going to be their best, and acknowledge and understand that everybody else isn't going to be their best, and that's okay.
No, I think that's excellent advice. And just want to be respectful of your time too. I don't know if you have something right after this or.
We started a few minutes late. I'm happy. I know people might have to drop off at the top of the hour since we started about 15 minutes late. I can't stay 15 more minutes, but let's do a couple more questions. I'll stay 5 or 10 more minutes.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, so let's see. Or I guess, the two main questions here. One was around from Zwede around, or he's based in Trinidad, like other startup communities in the Caribbean, and if you've been involved in other areas of the world, and basically initiatives that are going on outside of the local startup communities in the U.S.
Yeah, so I've been involved globally. Again, the experiment I'm playing right now is the virtual startup community. Zwede, I'd encourage you to jump in and play around with it, because if nothing else, you'll meet some people from other parts of the world that are interested in startups. I haven't personally done anything in any investing in the Caribbean. I'm going to bet that Techstars has some startup weekends that have happened. And by the way, if you send me an email, I'll put my email in here. It's easy to find, but I'll put it there. If you send me an email with, hey, is there any Techstars activity in the Caribbean? I'm happy to send it on to the Startup Week and Startup Weekend team and see if there's anything to get you connected into. I think generally speaking, and I would encourage this of people who are trying to get things going in places that are sort of disconnected from sort of physical place. And I don't want to say that that's not what the Caribbean is, but the Caribbean is kind of, from a U.S. perspective, the Caribbean is a vacation place. The same phenomena, by the way, occurs in Alaska. We just had this conversation yesterday, where people, in the U.S. don't think of, they know Alaska is part of the U.S., but they think of Alaska as a separate thing. And it's kind of a place you go for a vacation, to go fishing or hiking or hunting or whatever.
Right.
The interesting phenomena is if the people in the Alaska startup community actively make connections to other startup communities and other geographies through whatever network they're part of, those linkages start to be really powerful. The example I'll give you with Alaska is that there's a big linkage between Alaska and Colorado. That linkage happens to be not just me. I have a house, Amy and I have a house in Homer, Alaska, Amy grew up in Fairbanks. She's on the board of the Nature Conservancy's global board, but she's also on the Alaska State Board. Nigel Sharp, who is an entrepreneur that is very active in the Fairbanks startup community now, was in Boulder for many years. He's from, I forgot what country Nigel's from. I want to say Spain, but that doesn't feel right. Maybe England, maybe the UK. He's from Europe. He came to Boulder on something called the Global Entrepreneurs in Residence Program. So he wasn't of Boulder, right? So all of these connections are a little bit physical, but a lot virtual. But they carry from community to community. And the mistake a lot of startup communities make when they try to get going is they just focus on their own place versus making those linkages. Clearly on this call, you've got linkage at least to Jason from Boston. And obviously in the Startup Grind Network, there's lots of other linkages. Take advantage of that to try to have it reflect back, especially in a world where everybody's a little box in a video conference rather than having to fly everywhere.
Yeah, and no, that's I think you want to touch on the last point too, like sort of tying it into another question here, but basically, you know, when we all in the short term, when we're all just a box on the screen, I guess what's the best way to sort of keep building those connections, whether it's with you know, somebody was asking about like introductions or to investors you want as an advisor and mentors, people like that, like just, you know, how do you through it's different doing, you know, a handshake, meeting somebody in person and meeting them on the screen. How do you keep that same connection with new people you're meeting online?
So there's an enormous reconfiguration going on right now across the entrepreneurial landscape where virtual interactions and virtual investing is becoming a thing, right? In March or February, you know, if you'd said to an angel investor and a VC, hey, you're going to be making commitments without ever meeting the entrepreneurs in person, VC would have said, can't do that, have to meet the people in person. A lot of angels would have said, can't do that, have to meet the people in person. You know, we're here in September, there's lots of deals getting done, lots of investments being made. There's still challenges. By the way, it's always hard to raise money, so there's always challenges. But the dynamics are shifting. My view is entrepreneurs and investors spend a certain amount of time a week networking, or entrepreneurs spend a certain amount of time spending time face-to-face with VCs and with angel investors. And that amount of time may vary. Some weeks it could be zero, but most people it's probably somewhere between at least 5 and 10 hours a week by the time you go to a physical meetup, or you go to an evening event, or you go to a networking event, or you show up at a meeting that somebody made an intro for. Many of these activities are transitioning quickly to being online because people want these activities in the startup community. And the quality of those events vary widely, but you are able to do a lot more efficiency because you don't have to go to a place, right, stay at a place for a long time, and then go back to some other place. So even if you only have to go 15 or 30 minutes to some place, the amount of time friction wasted is probably an hour or 2 hours around that event. And so I'm trying to encourage people, even though we all get tired, like do more of these kinds of things. Like do more without an expectation of what's going to happen. Like maybe the speaker's great, maybe the speaker's terrible, maybe the event is great, maybe you meet some people, maybe it's not. Just do more. Because you don't have it's not the number that you did, it's the total number of hours a week. Give yourself a budget as an entrepreneur and weave that in. I would say that the counterbalance, which is very valid, is, yeah, that's right, Brad, but it doesn't work as well. People don't make the same kind of connections, you know. All right, the three of you are on a screen, but everybody else is in the chat. But I already see a few people here interacting with each other in the chat, right? Pay attention to how to engage. Look for those sort of links. Show up a couple of times at things, and all of a sudden you become part of the community, and that's where the magic starts to happen. It's no different than when you show up in person If you go to an event, you know no one, you meet a person or two. You go the next month to the same event, you meet a few more people. You go the next month to the same event, you know a few more people. By the 6th month, like you're an insider, you're a pro, you're one of the regulars. And so it's building that kind of consistency across the communities that you're interested in. And with that, I'm going to have to go because
all right. No, thanks a
I
lot.
push off the next one, but the next one's now coming at me.
Sounds great. Yeah, no, thanks for speaking with all of us, and yeah, it was a great chat. You know, I learned a lot. Looks like the rest of our group did as well, and yeah, I'll send you the recording and video after we're done here, and
enjoy the book. Enjoy the book, everyone. I have a simple message. 3 things. One is if you like the book, put up, do something with it. Post on Twitter, put up a review on Amazon, put up a review on Goodreads, whatever. Like that, every author loves that, including me. If you don't like the book, don't tell anyone. And the last is, and I say that jokingly, if you have constructive feedback on anything, please, I learn from feedback. So anything I said today that didn't land well or that you disagreed with or was confusing, feel free to drop me an email. Read the book. Anything that you read in it that you're like, this was a shitty explanation, Brad, or this doesn't match with my experience, totally open to that stuff. And my only request is that in the email, if you send me an email, just give me a clue, say Startup Grind Boston in the header or something so I know where you're coming from. And start with the punchline. Don't make me read 6 paragraphs to understand the question. You can put 6 paragraphs if you want, but start with what you want to get out of the interaction so I have an easy way to quickly interact with you.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks again. And yeah, I appreciate all the help and support today.
I see Sid's note. Have I made my sprint session frameworks with my wife public? Not really. I mean, we do it just to end. We do it verbally rather than formally. We do talk about it in the book Startup Life, with a bunch of other tactics. So if you're interested in that, just go Amazon Startup Life and grab a copy. But it's a pretty standard. I just end with this. It's a pretty standard. She talks about her last 30 days, and we interact about it. I talk about my last 30 days, and we interact with it. And then we sort of have a summary. And then we kind of say, are we done? Because somebody might have something more to say. And then we alternate the other order talking about the next month. And so we give each other space to react to each other, but it's not more structured than that. We don't have sticky notes. All right. Thanks, everyone. Sorry I was late.
No, thank you.
All right.
Have a good one.
Bye.